And thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. Welcome to the program. Michael D. Shaw is with us, as is our habit on Wednesday, now at 2 p.m. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Actually, the time hasn't changed. It's just the time zone.
The
You're
time's
you're
well,
you're
that's
now in
true.
Mountain Time, so that's right.
You could look at it that way. Of course, with what we're doing, it could be heard and seen anywhere in the world. Um, so there's obviously a great deal of drama taking place these weeks before the election on a lot of levels, but one in particular is the death of Bader Ginsburg, and that has opened a seat on the Supreme Court.
Right.
The reaction to this has been blatantly hysterical and unconstitutional on the part of the left. They're talking about packing the Supreme Court, something I've heard rumblings on, anyways, as a way to counter another Trump appointee. Packing the U.S. Senate by admitting Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. Maybe they should also admit Guam. Why not Western Samoa, too? Or the
Well, I'm not
Mariana
sure about
Islands.
Guam. I mean, you remember the worry that if there were too many people there, the island would sink.
That's right. If you hook up a boat to it.
Yeah.
Uh, the and other threats that are just emanating from that particular quarter. This is all in an atmosphere by which they are openly and brazenly trying to fix the election. And I say that in that there are now three states, all battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, where they have gotten their local state courts to declare it legal to vote well after election day and to have your vote counted. Um, I think in some cases it's 2 weeks after election day.
Right.
So they're already putting in place a means to just keep this thing going and keep recounting and recounting until they get what they want. And I don't know if it's going to work. I know that I saw a little quick note today pointing out that Joe Biden at 8:30 this morning put what's called a lid on his day. He
A
gave
lid.
one a lid. This is how they describe it. In other words, he'll work till usually about 11 o'clock. He'll make a speech, and then they put a lid on it. He's done. He goes home. He has a nap. He doesn't work any longer.
That's going to work real well if he's elected. He can just put a lid on the presidency.
Well, I mean that's what it looks like. I hope people can understand that. I mean, he doesn't have the stamina. They're afraid that after a certain amount of time, he's going to totally go. He's going to lose all semblance of lucidity and start, yammering inanely. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos of
Well,
this.
how
It's
could you
really,
tell the difference?
yeah. I mean, it's just pretty. It's pretty blatant and pretty sad in a way to just see him incoherently rambling. He doesn't have an attention span at this point. He's obviously not well. He obviously has dementia, I think. And, I don't know that. I'm not a doctor to diagnose him. But either way, he doesn't, his day is very short. There's like a little window where they put him out there. He makes a few comments, and then he goes back to bed for the rest of the day. So it's true. And meanwhile, Trump, of course, is barnstorming across the states, and he's getting better and better, and he's building more steam as he goes. Who knows whether it's going to work? I mean, I don't know if what the latest polls indicate. I think that it's tightening up in Florida. He seems to be gaining steam amongst Hispanics, which is great, and I think also blacks.
That's right.
But they're just going for broke. I mean, they're going to contest. They've got a. This is why, and I pointed this out to a close friend of mine, a member of my family. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Was very liberal. Why President Trump must get another judge confirmed before election day, because the Supreme Court needs an odd figure. It needs an odd number. It has to have 9, because if it doesn't, then it's going to be deadlocked 4-4, and it looks like this election is going to go to the Supreme Court, just like Bush versus Gore went to the Supreme Court. And I think that you could say that would be true even if Trump um, might take it to the Supreme Court. But either way, you're going to have a vote there, and you're going to need a tiebreaker. And especially with a conservative, that's really going to ensure that the Constitution is followed. In other words, that Trump will win.
All right.
um,
Well, let me take away the pain here a little
yeah.
bit. We could propose all these dire scenarios that might occur in a close election. The most absurd of which, of course, is that ballots could uh, appear after the election day in some of these states. But I think if it's not close, which I believe it won't be, then there's not going to be too many diehards that are going to care about trying to tip the balance. You can talk about Bush v. Gore all you want, but remember, Bush was a pretty lackluster character. He was a rhino. He didn't seem to care about very much. It was Gore's, frankly, election to lose, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
Although it came down, which is not the first time in history, apparently, that it came down to Florida. I think there was an election that Rutherford B. Hayes was involved with, and it also was Florida. But I think the whole thing is just to win by a lot. And all these doomsday scenarios fall apart. Obviously, if it's close, then they all come back. And that's why, if it does go to the Supreme Court, we need that ninth justice. And I think it's pretty clear we're going to get that ninth justice. And I think if it is Amy Coney Barrett, she may be actually a legit conservative, unlike some of these other faux conservatives. I won't mention his name, but his initials are Roberts, who were
Right. Well, no, totally. Yeah, he's completely sold out. But the thing is, to have a real conservative there now means that he's going to be pushed toward a more conservative position. Um, I also think that this Lagoa is pretty interesting from Florida. Barbara Lagoa,
yes.
I believe her name is. And I'll tell you why. Besides the fact that she actually is a very impressive person, she was the lawyer defending Elian Gonzalez
Oh, I
as
didn't
a
know that.
yeah,
Oh, my
and
word.
yeah, and she's done almost 10,000 cases, both as a lawyer and as a judge. Very hardworking, very conservative, very anti-communist. Not as affiliated maybe with the pro-life position as Barrett is, which might be good because that's going to be, let's not get into that. I mean, that's going to be a hot button. But the thing is that they play identity politics, and identity politics it can be a two-way street because she's Hispanic, and they're going to go over her record with a fine-tooth comb. They might even look at her high school yearbook and see whether she drank beer, right?
I think she's going to bring that. I mean, they all are going to bring that with them now.
Yeah.
But of
I mean,
course,
we're gonna look at her first grade report card. But the point is that they can't do that with her because she's Hispanic, and that's going to piss off the Hispanics, and they will lose Florida and they'll lose other states. So they're not. It kind of puts them in a box. Again, we're talking here the kind of identity politics that the left trucks in. So it's the kind of thing that could go, as I say, it could go both ways. So I think that she's going to have a certain immunity because of that. They're not going to mess with her too much. 3 weeks to an election, they don't want to alienate Hispanics. What do you think?
oh no, I would agree. That's why it's funny that she's probably the strategic choice. Um,
Plus, she's from Florida,
yeah, yeah.
and she's popular in Florida, very well liked. That could tip Florida, and Florida is key.
There may also be because Barrett had a rough time with the confirmation. Not that she did anything wrong, but she was subjected to a pretty harsh questioning when she was put up for the Seventh Circuit.
Well, the whole thing was that it was anti-Catholic bigotry.
Right,
Clearly,
right.
I mean, you had Feinstein, who, by the way, I understand herself is Catholic, even though she uses the name Feinstein so people think she's a Jew, and she had briefly married to a man named Feinstein.
Yeah.
Um, but she said, "Look, your faith is going to dictate your who you are, and that's not good. In other words, she was applying a religious litmus test. And I think that if she's nominated, that's what this is all going to come down to. It's going to be a huge anti-Catholic attack, and I'm not sure that there are enough Catholics in this country that care enough or understand enough, because so many of them have become liberal that they may not. I mean, the church has become very diverse anyway.
That's a nice
Um,
way of putting it.
yeah, I mean, look, it's not as bad as Judaism. Don't get me wrong, but many average Catholics don't care, and they might even agree. You get a big cross section ideologically. So, I don't think that that's a good fight for Trump to have. It may not augur well, even though I think either way they're going to be confirmed. But the question is, can they help Trump? This is in a sense Trump's opportunity, and he's already said it, to have a woman running mate, to counter Biden, even though she's, it's the Supreme Court. And it's a great opportunity. But I hope it's done in a way that causes the least pain, I guess. What do you think?
Well, okay, there's kind of good points on either side. Superficially, Lagoa has these strategic advantages: female, Hispanic, Cuban, Florida. Um, she's also at least nominally Catholic. I don't know how hardcore she is.
Right.
Um, so, but then they may go after her anyway. They didn't care about going after Clarence Thomas. Uh,
Well, I
who
just think it's so
supposedly was a
close to, yeah, but that was not close to an election. I mean, they don't want to
yeah,
they don't want to alienate. I mean, the Hispanic
okay.
vote is huge, and if they alienate even a small percentage of it, that could be doomsday. So I think she's protected because of that, and not only that, but she not only would she be treated with kid gloves, but she is going to generate Hispanic support.
Yeah. I think it's a strategic choice. On the other hand, you might look at Coney Barrett as being the soccer mom type
True.
outreach, and I really believe that unlike the stereotypical statements that are made by so-called pundits, it's very hard for me to believe that suburban women are all liberal and hate Trump. Uh,
That's a good point because that they are portrayed as the base for the liberal Democrats and the Trump haters. Suburban upper class white women. That is the base for the Democratic Party right now.
well, that's what they say, but I kind of think the base is 25-year-old Twitter users that live in the city.
Maybe people like AOC.
Yeah, because most other people actually have real lives. You know, if you identify with a quote peaceful protester out there burning buildings, chances are you're not really of a legit demographic. Indeed, as they peel back the layers of this onion, they find that many of these people have been exposed as being, you can call them red diaper babies, but a lot of them came out of privileged backgrounds. Um, and those kind of people always were left wing. I met people
Well,
like that.
they don't really matter. We're gonna not get them anyway. And I think wasn't there
Yeah.
recently an incident, I think in Portland, Oregon, or maybe Louisville, Kentucky, where a whole group of them were picked up, and they were all, as you say, suburban white wealthy kids, spoiled, the typical type. You and I know the type.
Oh yeah,
And
I went to school with them.
exactly, as did I. I mean, none of them are black, none of them are from the city, and the people that are in the cities that are being burned, I think they might be having another look at Trump and a change of heart, and I think that could swing maybe even Minnesota. I don't think he's going to take Oregon, but you never know. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible?
Well, Oregon is an interesting place that really the only radical part of it, admittedly, it's a big population center, is the Portland area. But Eastern Oregon is rural and conservative. Uh, Coastal Oregon is a funny place because it's economically somewhat depressed. Uh, but there's, hardcore people out there,
Hmm.
family values and so on. So you can't judge Oregon by Portland, albeit the population may tip over. But even then, it's hard to believe that if you're living in Oregon, in Portland, and have a family, you're supporting this nonsense.
Same thing with Washington. I mean,
Yeah,
Seattle is not no great shakes right now. I wonder if that. I mean, that would be a miraculous. I think that I don't think that Trump is going to take those states, but it would be very interesting if he closes the gap a little bit.
yeah,
That could just look great, and then if he picks up Minnesota, that could be the hat trick. You know.
yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting how it plays out. There's been all these scenarios and so on and so forth. And when you compare it to 2016, the
Hmm.
predominant scenario was Hillary's got it in the bag.
Right.
Now, they're not quite pushing that as much anymore with Biden. Have you noticed that?
Oh no, they're not saying it now. Although, I mean, if you look at the Drudge Report, which is completely
Oh,
sold out, every day, Biden ahead by 8, Biden ahead by 10. I mean, I look at that thing, it's depressing. I can't even look at it.
no,
Your heart
I don't
sinks.
know. I don't know what happened to him. He sold out.
Oh, completely, completely
But
gone.
then you kind of wonder about these media outlets. You may have seen that infamous interview on Fox where they had Newt Gingrich,
Oh
and
yeah, you mean with the Soros comment?
yeah, and toward the end of the interview, he starts referring to Soros, and then you look at what's her name, Harris Faulkner, I think. Um,
Hmm.
Sort of look at, you can tell she's listening to the producer in the headphone, and apparently said, no, you can't mention Soros. And that was explained later as apparently, now tell me if this is right, because you're an official Jew. Apparently, if you criticize a Jewish person for any reason at all, you're anti-Semitic.
Well, I mean that's the line, the party line of the left wing ADL.
Yeah.
They'll say I'm anti-Semitic. I mean, anyone, and it's not even of criticizing any Jew. It's criticizing anything that's on the left. If you criticize abortion, you're anti-Semitic. If you criticize gay marriage, you're anti-Semitic. It has nothing to do with Judaism, but it's like that's just it's being used the same way that the radical uh, people like Al Sharpton and them will use the black cudgel. Anyone who criticizes anything is racist. I mean, it's something that has to be seen in that context. I don't know if you saw this, but President Trump just brilliantly got rid of critical race theory,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is it's something that I'm getting a guest on who's an expert on this. Um, it basically, these people do seminars for private businesses and governments.
For lots of money.
Oh yeah, I mean huge, and getting all money pouring in from the federal government, and they say things like, you know, if you stand for financial success, competition, good family values, you're racist. And this kind of radical stuff that itself is quite racist. What are they saying? Black people don't want good families and financial success. That's not being, that's you're not really black. It's sort of, and Trump has called it out. I mean, he's defunded it, and I haven't heard much screaming about it on the left either because they don't want to have that whole agenda laid out and exposed
Well,
because it is pretty ugly.
that's exactly right. It was a good strategic move, because it's one of these things that when it sees the light of day, a lot of people scurry away from it.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good idea, because there were very few people that were actually going to defend it. Not only
No,
because,
nobody is. Everyone's hiding, waiting. They're biding their time. They're waiting. They're going
yeah,
to see if maybe Biden can win, in which they'll come back. And if he doesn't win, they'll wait a few more. They'll wait. It's very Fabian. They'll wait another 5 years. But they're not. They're just being. It's like, to them, it's a strategic battle. This is a totalitarian cudgel. That's all it is. We're going to go after our enemies and put them on a microscope and claim they got something against black men and women, and find something that they said in 1975, and to prove this. So because you look this way, I remember this came up in the last election too. I think it was Chris Matthews who has been done in by the Me Too movement,
Right.
who, he was saying references to the suburbs is racist. References to, he had a whole list of things, all racist, putting aside the fact that he lived in a very well to do suburb and his children attended an all white school. Never mind. The point is that he had this whole theory about so called dog whistles of racism and that it's interesting that those dog whistles were things that we all aspire to. What are they saying? Black people don't want that? I mean, that's racist. It's a kind of white man's burden of fetus racism that I just hope is called out. I hope people can understand it. I think more and more black people are understanding it. I'm watching a lot of these people, in the social media who are really coming out and saying, and they're black activists and they're young black people saying, this is crazy. We're proud to be in this country. We want the same thing everyone else wants. We want to have successful families. We want to have financial success. I mean, this isn't, anti-black.
No, no.
They're anti-black because they want to, their policies have hurt black communities.
Yeah, well, this was always true. In fact, when I was, my goodness, when I was in high school, and the LA school district's very large, and I happened to be at one of the higher demographic high schools. And after the Watts riots, we reached out to Jordan High in Watts, and there was a couple of meetings in Watts after the riots, where all these white kids come down there and meet with them. But here was the point, that they wanted the same things we did.
Of course they did.
Not that that's a big revelation.
No, I mean, but the thing is that these people like AOC who lives in some ivory tower, they don't get out on the street and meet people and find out what they really want. They're too busy looting black neighborhoods and killing black people and burning black businesses from their lily white suburbs to even imagine what black people actually want. They want to have safety and they want to have the same thing everyone else wants. They want the communities to be properly kept safe from thugs. I mean, I saw this black kid. He said, in I think it was in Louisville 2 nights ago, 3 young black men were shot dead, but the media is not going to talk about it because the shooter was black.
Right.
So if it had gone with the scenario that it was a white supremacist Trump supporter who did it, we would never have heard the end of it. But do those 3 Black Lives matter? I mean, they were just shot down. I mean, this is this is racist. It doesn't matter who the race is. These men were targeted and they were black, and we don't hear about it. No one even knows about it.
Yeah, well, the news has managed to portray a certain narrative, and I've often asked myself, who is the prime consumer of this narrative? It can't be people that actually know what's going on. Rather, it has to be some iteration of these young, white, spoiled kids that are engaging in these peaceful protests, as we call them.
Oh, they are. They're very white. I mean, anyone who's seen pictures of it, they're 99% white.
Michael Savage used to call them women on the Upper East Side with hysterectomies. That was his. But it was people that it's the demographic of the Washington Post. That it's people that want to have reinforced a certain understanding of the world that actually isn't correct, but it's their stereotype that they were taught in the 6th grade by Miss McGillicuddy, who was a Fabian socialist, and this is where it ends.
They stopped thinking it. At that point, their entire mind became stunted, and they just got locked in. I mean, there are people like that woman who tried to cross the Canadian border with an envelope filled with ricin.
Yes.
Right, heading for the White House. I mean, did you get a load of her? I mean, this is what they're about.
Well, it was stupid. She could have mailed it from Canada. It would have been easy.
Yeah, right. Or the guy that shot up a baseball game with Republican ball players.
Yeah.
Right, Bernie Sanders supporter. And I remember mentioning this to an ultra liberal friend of mine, and she goes, "Oh, it was Trump's fault." Really?
Well, that's the all-purpose answer. Uh,
That still aggravates me.
well, when they're pushed to it, they got nothing else to say.
Well,
Okay.
they believe it. He's created an atmosphere. He's created a milieu.
Yeah, that's right. When you have no other argument, that falls apart. But one thing I wanted to address,
Yeah.
which first of all, we can talk briefly about uh, why this hysterical overreaction to Bader Ginsburg. Uh, she certainly wasn't the only pro-abortion, pro-homosexual Supreme Court justice. Um, I looked into her history, and some of it is a little odd. Uh, Academically great. She went to Harvard Law School, transferred to Columbia Law School. Here's where it gets interesting. She had a hell of a time getting a clerk position with a federal judge, to the point that she had a champion at the Columbia Law School, the dean, who threatened to never recommend anybody to this particular judge again as a clerk unless he gave her a shot, and guaranteed that if she didn't work out, he would pull someone who was as highly qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Which, how would that happen? I've never heard of anyone having such a hard time getting a clerkship position, and could only conclude that despite her academic achievement, there was just something in her personality that people didn't seem to appreciate.
Well, the way she portrays it, or the way it was portrayed, I don't know if you saw the movie As a Matter of Sex.
I couldn't bring myself.
Well, I did see it. I'll acknowledge, and the way it was portrayed there is that she was being discriminated against because she's a woman. Now, I don't know if that's
There
the
are plenty
case.
of
Were
women
there?
legal clerks.
Yeah, I mean, I thought so. I mean, I think that this we're talking like maybe mid 70s.
Yeah.
I think that there were at that point.
There was nothing unusual about a woman being a lawyer in the mid 70s.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I
Maybe in
mean,
the 1870s, but I
oh
mean,
yeah,
come on.
oh sure. Well, I mean, that's how that is portrayed. And then she went on to take this big case involving this guy actually who, um,
Well, that's when she went to the ACLU.
yeah, and he was saying that he has parental rights because he was a single father, and that's how she was able to get that in before a judge. And it actually was a pretty good, argument she made. But there's this lionization going on. This liberals get this. I mean that what's his name, Lewis from Georgia, got the same thing. They'll be lying in state, and there'd be people wringing their hands, and it's a huge. I mean, I guess that people on the left, they don't generally believe in a creator.
Yeah, there you go.
They worship people. I mean, they have idols. They put them, and they give them this kind of like almost idol, and I mean idols in almost in the old biblical sense.
Well, it's sort of what
They're
the old
godlike.
ancestor worship.
Yeah, or it's like they become godlike.
Yeah.
Like in this is what the Bible warns us about: idol worship. And you see them. I mean, I remember like when Hillary Clinton. This is a just simple example. When she was running for running for senator in New York,
Yeah.
she got this kind of lionized treatment. I remember New York Magazine, gigantic picture of her with one foot straddling Manhattan and the other foot straddling New York State, and looking like the Statue of Liberty. And this, it's like something out of like the great Greek Colossus. Right? I mean, it's and they all get that. They do that for all of them. Obama, he was on the cover of like 25 magazines before he was elected, and then he gets the Nobel Prize after only being in office for 2 weeks. It did nothing. Even Obama, one of his moments of candor, scratched his head on that one.
Yeah.
Like, what happened here? What did I do? This is what they do for each other. It's like this kind of like mutual massage society or something. I mean, they lionize each other to the point of just beyond belief. Now, if when Clarence Thomas passes away, he's not going to be sitting in state at the U.S. Capitol.
No.
He's not going to be getting these self, congratulatory speeches of how he struggled and this and that and none of that. He's not going to get any. It'll be like a bottom of the page story, and that's why. I mean, I think that's partially why you get these rhino Republicans and these so-called conservatives kissing up to the left because they want that treatment. They're attracted to it. They don't want to be attacked, and they want to get on the front page of the newspaper with with a picture that doesn't make them look like an owl. You know?
Well, I guess the originator of that, at least in modern times, was probably Richard Nixon. He always wanted to be one of the cool kids,
Yeah.
and
Well, Nixon learned the hard way that he's never gonna be one of the cool
right,
kids.
right.
They might use you for a while, but they're not going to go. They're not going to keep it up. I mean, I think maybe Mitt Romney thought that he could get a few pointers in that department, but I think he seems to have come to his senses. It's very fleeting. They might give you a few. I mean, even recently, who was it? I mean, the media will completely play ball with you. Was it Jake Tapper actually contacted a candidate for Congress
Oh yeah.
and said, "Don't run against this guy. Run in this other one. It's safe. And if you do, we'll give you a benefit. We'll put you on television." They had a scandal like that in Massachusetts a couple of years ago too.
Well, it's what we call in Catholic theology the sin of human respect, and you certainly see it with the liberal politicians. You see it in the entertainment industry, like mad.
Well, but that's what they're all about. It's all image. That's their job. That's their job is to look good. They have a staff of people. I mean, look, I don't know. They have a personal cook to make sure they don't put on weight. They have personal trainers to give them exercise routines. They have fashion experts. They have somebody following them around doing their hair. They get facelifts. Their whole career is based on what they actually look like. That's what that is, isn't it?
Or what they look like, at least when they're on camera.
Well, of course.
They may not look the same when they're off.
No, they most likely don't. I mean, Jane Fonda comes to mind, but I don't know why.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's their job: look good and be out in the media. So yeah, they're the first. That's the most obvious, group that's gonna succumb to that. I mean, they're gonna do whatever it takes.
As to packing the Supreme Court, what I find interesting about that is that when Roosevelt proposed this in 1937, he was the president.
Yes.
He was getting some of his New Deal stuff shot down and came up with this law, which never passed, allowing him to add 6 more than the 9 that actually was created in a somewhat obscure law in 1869, I believe, that set out the 9. I mean, it is true. There's no constitutional provision for how many are on the court, but obviously, if you keep packing it to the point that there's 500 members, it's going to become ludicrous. And even Roosevelt, who controlled everything at that point, was unable to make it happen, and he was opposed by lots of Democrats.
Oh, it was the lowest point of his presidency.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big overreach, and he did it after he won re-election, and he thought he could get it in, and that knocked him down a big peg. I mean, that was considered a low point.
Yeah.
It was obvious. That's where the term court packing comes from.
Right, but I mean, what was interesting, the comparison here is he was in power.
Right.
He was popular.
Yeah.
But now you have people like Schumer that are out of power, knowing that this 9th justice is going to be confirmed. So this is just some kind of stupid, I don't know what, masturbatory saber rattling or something.
Well, he actually went on the steps of the Supreme Court. I think it was a few months ago, maybe last year, and he literally waved his fist and said, Trump's appointees are going to pay a price. It was very threatening, actually. He could have been arrested, for threatening them. I mean, it was very personal. He went on a rant about
Has he just been in too long? I mean, him and Pelosi were always kind of crummy, But in
Yeah,
the last couple of years, they've just gotten so toxic, it's almost humorous.
it's horrendous. I mean, Pelosi's the worst. Oh my God, just and to imagine if they dribble the ball, she could end up being president. You know, if there's no president by inauguration day, guess who's going to be in office?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's her. It's just wretched and horrendous. I mean, one of the most loathsome individuals.
yeah,
I
she
mean, she
just,
should
it's almost like she enjoys getting worse and worse.
she should have been probably arrested for tearing up the national for the State of the Union,
Ugh.
which is horrendous, negative, ugly.
Well, have you
Um,
noticed this phenomenon that seems to occur in American politics where the child is worse than the father? Uh, Pelosi's father was a very corrupt mayor of Baltimore.
mhm.
She started being involved in politics when she was a teenager, running the Laren's for him. Okay, so she's the worst offspring. George Romney, there was a lot wrong with George Romney, but Mitt ended up being worse. Cyrus Vance was not a favorite, but Cyrus Vance Jr.
Oh
was
yeah, he's
worse.
like going
And
after.
you see the pattern here. Um, JFK certainly had his issues as president. His son was basically a cipher, was worse than him in any way, because even JFK wouldn't have put as women in danger to the point that JFK Jr. did. Uh,
You mean by flying that plane?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that was just nuts.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can continue this exercise almost without exception on both sides.
Well, the next generation they start to lose it becomes diluted. I guess. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that's an accurate observation. Certainly true with the Kennedy family.
Oh boy, oh
Yeah. I
boy.
mean,
I mean,
so anyway, but
yeah.
what say you with regard to election day this year? Do you think it's going to be? I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
I would like to think that this is going to be a no questions asked electoral victory, to the point that it's going to upset the Democrats because they realize that all this chicanery will have no effect.
God willing. I mean, and I think that they're going to go out and try to have a little revolution, and it's going to be laughable. They're going to get knocked down within 24 hours
Well,
once
I
Trump
mean,
wins.
the advantage of a decisive victory to that is uh, the I had observed at the time when uh, I think it was the end of the Iraq War, where there were these militant bands that were going around causing trouble, and a lot of people forgot, and I'm not making a complete comparison. After World War II, some of the same stuff occurred in Germany and Japan,
Right.
and it was crushed with no mercy.
Oh yeah.
And that was that.
And I think that's what's going to happen after the election. If they start to go out, these communist groups funded by George Soros and others, radicalized, they go, I mean, Antifa traces its background right to the Nazi Germans. I mean, it goes, to that period. And it does, I think it's connected to the Baader Meinhof gang. There's a very
Oh yeah.
mysterious, I mean, they will be completely and utterly crushed. They will be viewed for what they are: insurrectionists, secessionists, um, and they will be taken down and should be immediately. But I think Trump can't do it right now. I think it's going to have to be after the election.
Well, it's the old story from Ecclesiastes: "There's nothing new under the sun." And it turns out, and I wish I remember the guy's name, was a defense attorney for the brown shirts when the Nazis were first having, and he used the same expression, peaceful protesters.
This is probably the one thing that I think is, there's always certain moments during a campaign that lose the election for the candidate. And sometimes they can be these meaningless visual moments, like when Dukakis got in the tank, right?
That was
Yeah, it
good.
just it was so absurd. Being from Boston, I remember this. I mean, I've met Dukakis a few times. He actually came on my show.
Yeah.
Privately, he's a very nice guy. But I remember Susan Estrich at the time was given a call by somebody saying, "We have trouble. We have a problem here."
And he was
And
ahead by
yeah,
20 something points.
and she's like, "Well, what's going on?" And she goes, "Michael has just been filmed traveling in a tank." And she's like, "Oh boy."
And that picture of that helmet that was 5 sizes too
Oh, but
big.
yeah, looking poking his little neck out there. It ended it for him. I mean, it's like, or the Willie Horton thing too. Well, that was an incredible story.
I don't know. My favorite New England politician self-destructing was Howard Dean with the "I
Yeah,
Have a Scream" speech.
Yahoo! Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, these moments, and I think in this election, I also think that the end of the John Kerry campaign was something that had nothing to do with him personally. It had to do with the Wellstone Memorial. I don't know if you remember that
Oh,
in
vaguely, yeah.
yeah, in Minnesota.
Where what? It was
Uh,
a funeral, and then someone
yeah,
goes on this rant about vote for John Kerry.
yeah, and it was
Oh,
like Wellstone was a very liberal senator who
yeah,
died tragically in an airplane crash
yeah,
along with
yeah,
his son and the pilot. And he was one of these guys who played both. He had friends on both sides.
yeah, yeah.
He was one of the old-fashioned, good, solid congressmen who knew how to get along with people and get things done. And they had this memorial service for him. And Bill and Hillary Clinton were in the audience. A lot of others were in the audience. At the time, Trent Lott wanted to go because he was a personal friend. They said, no, you can't come. They said Cheney can't come, even though he was a friend.
Right.
And they went on these leftist speeches with their ashen faces and their fists in the air and their screeching and it just was so, and it all was carried by CNN, no editing. And the whole country saw this and they were like, "Oh my god, this is who this is. It showed the heart and soul of the Democratic Party." And I think that was the undoing for John Kerry. It was a moment in time where we learned something. We learned who was behind and what they were about, and it was so ugly and so nasty
Was
that
it ever? Did anyone ever determine whether he personally inspired that?
Wellstone.
Because
No,
no,
he
no, no,
didn't.
no, no, no. Kerry. In other
No,
words,
I don't even think Kerry had much to do with it. I mean, I
yeah,
think that it just that was his party. That was the zeitgeist of the
yeah, okay,
times. And I think that for this election, the telling moment for people was when the left wing media that President Trump has accurately called fake news all this time, when they went out with their reporters and talked about peaceful protests, and you could see buildings burning
fine,
in the
yeah.
background and people running, and you heard firecrack, like machine gun sounding noises, and complete anarchy in the background while they're telling us that these are peaceful protests. That is the telling moment for this campaign. That is what people are going to, because that it just it's like what the Chernobyl accident was to the Soviet Union, right? When the
Yeah,
Chernobyl
yeah.
nuclear plant blew up, the Soviet Union did what they always did. The communists always did. They lied a lot. They said, "Oh, this was an American plot. This never happened." But it became so obvious that it had happened that that was the end. They unraveled after that. Shortly after that, the lie had been exposed to such a point where there was no way going back. I mean, it was just everyone knew. And I think that this is one of those moments with the burning buildings in the background. People are seeing that. I think that's their undoing.
Well, I mean, in going back, I think it's the guy's name was something like Roland Felber. Something I'll
Mhm.
have to look it up. I'm sorry, but um, those there was nothing like this kind of destruction back then. It was basically fistfights,
Right.
and yet that was peaceful protests. And he was the same guy that rode this into a high position with Hitler, and they had these kangaroo courts where thousands of people were condemned to death on with no evidence, no real proceedings. Um, I was really it was amazing to find that out. You know, you think that
And this was post World War II, right?
no, it was
Oh,
pre-World War
oh,
II.
pre World War. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is where the Nazi Party was, you know, when they were doing their street thing.
Yeah, right, right. Hmm.
And he was a big apologist. Uh, he started as the defense attorney for some of these thugs, and then he became this big apologist and became a bigger political figure. Uh, and I don't know that there's anybody specifically analogous to him now, but the notion of this peaceful protest thing, contrary to all, and they could almost get away with it then because there was no TV.
Right. They had a lot of the state,
Yeah.
the media was small. Maybe another one of these moments, these teaching moments, was Newt Gingrich being shut down on Fox
Oh
when he
yeah,
mentioned. And the thing is that that's gone viral. And then what he was saying is interesting. He was saying that George Soros had put, I think it was $18 million, maybe $20 million
yes,
toward electing these corrupt district attorneys in the big cities. These are the people in Chicago, St. Louis, a couple of other cities, Minneapolis maybe, who because Soros knows where the power is. These are the same people who are letting off the criminals. This is the same district attorney who let off that Jesse Smollett. Remember
yeah,
that
exactly.
in Chicago. They are they're playing his political game, and that I think is revealing. I think that should be troubling that somebody could come in and buy, people like that and create. I mean, now you have Michael Bloomberg doing it in Florida where he's paying the fines of ex cons so they can vote. That's buying votes.
Well, he's yeah, but he of course he's selectively deciding which ones, thinking that these are going to vote Democrats, which is really buying votes,
Yeah, it
which is
is.
actually illegal.
And I hope that that goes. I hope that that charge is brought because yeah, there are laws against that. That's pay somebody to vote. I mean, this is a tip of the iceberg in terms of I think what we're going to see happen. Last time in 2015, you had New Hampshire, uh, busloads of people going in and voting. They had a law saying you could register the same day
Yeah,
if you intended to move to New Hampshire and you could vote. And then 30 days later, you have to declare. 30 days was after the election.
of course.
And, Hillary won New Hampshire by just a thread. I mean, it was like 2,000, and there was over 3,000 of those kinds of votes. So, this is the kind of crap that they do. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen this time in New Hampshire. There's a Republican governor there now, Sununu, and he knows about this. This is not.
What happened to New Hampshire? I
Well,
mean,
you had all these big fat, liberal Massachusetts, fat cat left wingers crossing the border and moving to New Hampshire because they didn't want to pay state taxes.
and they just somehow couldn't make the connection.
No, but they still vote that way. I mean, it's about an hour commute, an hour maybe an hour and a half commute from New Hampshire border to Boston.
Yeah,
So it's not unreasonable. I actually used to do it when I had a radio show in Nashua, New Hampshire.
right.
It can be done. And so you had, and it's a very cheap place to live. There's no property taxes. There's no sales tax. You
Well,
can.
no, there's sales tax, the property tax pretty high.
Oh, and yeah, you're right. The property
Yeah,
tax, but there's no sales tax, and there's
correct.
other things.
And there's no
It's
income tax.
right. It's a cheap, easy place to live. You could get a lot for a little. So Massachusetts types are all moving up to what we call Massa Hampshire, the border area, and yet they're taking their liberalism with them, ironically, and they have tipped the balance of the culture of the state. But that's another thing. I think that the pandemic is going to help Trump for two reasons. Firstly, because speaking of New Hampshire, the college kids are not going to be there. The big liberal centers in New Hampshire is Dartmouth and the University of New Hampshire, huge colleges, both big liberal centers. And you have
So,
a phenomena where they vote in New Hampshire and they may even vote at home too. We don't know. But the fact is that they're not there because of the pandemic. That's going to hurt. That's going to help Trump in states like New Hampshire, maybe Michigan, maybe Ohio, Wisconsin. These are big college states. A lot of liberals go there from all around the country to attend college and they vote. The other factor is that I think the pandemic itself is going to help Trump because the further left you are, the more liberal you are, the more Democrat you are, the more you're inclined to strap the mask on more, to not go out, to to wipe down your groceries, to not touch doorknobs. They're not going to go out and vote. Whereas the more Republican you are, the more conservative you are, while you respect the fact that there is a pandemic, you're willing to function. You'll put the mask on, but you'll go out and you'll vote. You'll go to a restaurant, but you'll sit outside, but you still
Yeah.
go. So I think that those two factors are going to help Trump.
That's interesting. I never quite made the political connection with the masked people, but
Oh yeah,
uh,
the
some of
the
these masked
further.
people are just nuts. You see them driving
Oh
in
my
their
God.
car with their masks on.
Yeah, they walk around without, and there's nobody around, and they'll
Yeah.
still wear it, and it's unhealthy. But
Well,
putting the
I have to tell you, there's a guy in my neighborhood, older guy, older than me, and he's walking around the same thing. There's nobody there. He's got a mask on. So one day, my wife and I are up front, and we see the same guy. He's not wearing a mask. And so I jokingly say, "Oh wow, where's your mask?" And he's, "Oh no, I forgot it. No, no, no. I said it's okay. It's okay." But no, he went back home to get his mask,
right.
and I couldn't talk him out of it. I
Well,
should have kept my
I don't
mouth
know if
shut.
it's that they're attracted to the idea of authoritarian government. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a psychological thing, but either way, I think it's going to help Trump because
Well, good.
obviously conservatives are going out. They're attending rallies. They're functioning. They're not getting sick. They can see that everything is going to be functional, and they're going to vote. Which reminds me, I want to ask you as a medical reporter. Um, do you think there's? I mean, there were rumors, certainly in Europe, not so much in this country, that there's going to be a big second wave, and that it's going to happen maybe later this year. Um, is there anything to that? Should we be concerned?
My take on that is that, first of all, they've been talking about this for months. And I think it's a scare tactic because you get into these funny terminology things. Um, you have a pandemic. There's no such thing really as the second wave of a pandemic. Yes, there were in the Spanish flu. There was peaks that came back, but you can't really compare what happened over 100 years ago when there was no health care to now. Also, people get fooled because while there are new strains of the flu every year, no one ever talks about this is the 74th
Mhm.
upswing, and so I think it's a scare tactic. I
Okay.
think that if you look at the figures, and you can parse data any way you want. Okay, so if you go and find some county that between Wednesday and Friday of the last week, and compared to this week, there's now a slight upswing. You could say, "Oh my gosh, it's increased." Um, but the way they've kept records on this is appalling. And as I've said from the beginning, if there's any good that's come out of this, it's exposed how incompetent organized public health is. These are people that have been paid for decades to do their job, never really had to do anything. And now, when the first crisis comes up, arguably since 1968, with the Hong Kong flu, which, by the way, they didn't do anything about, now in almost every case, they've dropped the ball. And
Yeah.
in many cases, Trump had to step in and shut off China, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, these Democratic governors got involved, trying to create these autocratic situations and everywhere they could. So there's no logical reason why a particular virus that's been around for arguably 10 months or longer, it's going to suddenly mutate into this horrific new strain. That's not what happens. As
Yeah.
viruses mutate, they get less virulent because to be successful, you don't want to kill all the hosts. But there's been no end to the amount of misinformation on this. People who should know better, unfortunately, don't. There's a whole bunch of these virologists that are swearing up and down that this could not have been an engineered virus. And the reason is, they say, because the outer coating, the spike protein that gets you into the cell, is not well designed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so stupid, they don't see that, well, wait a minute, if I were going to engineer a virus, I wouldn't want to make it look like an engineered virus, would I? So it's just phenomenal how all these experts are being exposed as being nothing more than book smart people that should stay in the lab and keep their mouths shut. It's just pathetic.
No, I absolutely. And, so far, at least in Massachusetts, the virus, the Boston Globe comes out with at least some information every day. They don't give you the full details, but the rate is at under 1% and has been
Right.
0.8% since, I think, probably maybe August or even July. It hasn't, or even June. It hasn't moved. So, I don't see, I mean, I can't imagine there'll be suddenly this big uptick. I don't know. Maybe there will be. Who knows?
No, I don't think so. But I was going to ask you something. You're always mentioning uh, in passing, you have friends who are very liberal.
Yes.
So what I was going to ask you is, presumably they have kids. Do the kids uniformly drink the Kool-Aid?
Yes.
Or
It's a world. It's
really?
Massachusetts. Yeah. They don't exist outside of this hermetically sealed cult-like world. That's
Well,
the
what
only way to
about
describe it.
the natural
They feel
rebellion
they
of a
feel they're
child?
being rebellious by being part of this. This is the rebellion. The rebellion is critical race theory. The rebellion is
Ah,
transgender theories. All of that. I mean, it's this is their rebellion, and they're giving. I know someone who's raising money by baking cookies and selling it so she can send it to Black Lives Matter. Right. This is what's going on. I mean, it's yeah. It's I really don't know how to reach them, and I never did, and I'm not about to try to.
wow.
It's you just hope that I mean, some people from direct experience might wake up from it. I don't know.
Well, okay, but is it seems to be the old story, and maybe people don't pick up on it. One of my favorite questions I ask people is real life more like high school or college? And of course, any thinking person is going to tell you real life is more like high school.
Hmm.
Okay. But the intellectuals will have a hard time with that question because they inherently know that I'm right, but they can't say that because their whole being is based on this intellectualism, which of course exists in college much more than in high school. But at some point, how do you avoid reality your entire life?
Well, I mean, the college is something that is very far from reality. I mean,
Yeah,
it's yeah. I
but
think
you
it was
eventually
it.
graduate and go out into what we call the real world, right?
Yeah, but I mean, they when you've genuflected to the left and you develop a network of other people who have genuflected, and they all sort of it forms a rat line. They kind of work with each other, help each other. Everybody has already sold out a long time ago. Everybody conforms. I mean, it's what philosopher Joseph Schumpeter mentioned this. I think I mentioned that too. I heard a
Hmm.
great quote from him. Great economist, great thinker. He said that there are three types of people who are attracted to the left. The first is college professors and people who are associated with colleges. The second are people who have had some great personal dislocation in their life. Something horrible has happened and they've lost their sense of mooring. I mean, they don't know, they need to look to an external. And the third are people in government, right?
Hmm.
Government, the government mandarins, the apparatchiks, people who, they're all removed from reality. They're not dealing in a situation that involves logic and reason. They're dealing in another realm almost.
So in other words, if you're in one of those three
You're more
worlds,
you're more inclined. You're more inclined. And I think it's taken over various institutions in this country, um, particularly the media and even big business, even religion, organized religion.
oh yeah,
I think the Catholic Church is a little bit more immune from this, but certainly Judaism and mainline Protestantism, completely taken over by this, and I think it was a deliberate agenda. I mean, I really do. I think that it goes back to John Dewey and the so-called frontier thinkers, the educators in the 1920s and 30s. Groups like the ACLU and the Fabians, the Frankfurt School, which was
yeah.
a group of German expatriates who wrote books like Theodor Adorno and Eric Fromm and all these other guys who wrote books basically saying that with this critical thinking that the American middle class and American conservatives are actually fascists. They don't know it. It's subconscious. And they launched the sexual revolution, which has denigrated morality and people's sense of moral standing, and have made us all sort of into Epicureans. We're all like everything, whatever feels good is good. It's we've given up our core.
Well, in your personal journey, although I didn't know you when you were really young, even though I've known you for over 20 years,
Yeah.
but were you ever liberal?
Yes,
Okay.
I was. I grew up liberal. I was very much a man of the left. Actually, right up until I was like in my late 20s when I started
Oh,
to
okay.
think about it. Yeah. And I mean, I could get into. I mean, there were certain things that happened that
Yeah.
made me think differently. One of them actually was listening. I mean, I used to, for my work, I did a lot of deliveries and I spent a lot of time in the car. And I fell in love with talk radio while I was
Oh,
driving.
that'll do it.
That's and particularly Jerry Williams. I don't know if you know who he is. One of the pioneers of talk radio. A man of the left, by the way. I mean, but yet somehow there was something about the way he conducted himself on the air that had a certain ring of honesty to me, and I was amazed that both him and callers off the street, and he was one of the first people to take calls, had a lot more sense and a lot more kind of insight than these, kind of pundits at the Boston Globe, the official, deliverers of the news and opinion. And I really became. It made me sort of change my thinking on a lot of things.
Hmm,
I started to over time. And years later, when I was broadcasting at a small Christian station in Quincy, which is just south of Boston,
right.
and Jerry Williams had been finally fired by the WRKO, which is the big station in
Yeah.
Boston, because he had exposed some of the corruption around the Big Dig, and that was a no-no back then.
Yeah.
This is
And
still
there
the
was
day.
plenty of it, believe me.
Oh yeah, and this is still the days of Whitey Bulger, and
Yeah.
this the state was run by mobsters. It was very bad. It's no longer. It's better now. But
Yeah.
he was fired. He was gone, and then there was an article about him in the Globe, like saying, "Oh, he's retired," and I found out that the guy that was producing the broadcast at my small station knew Jerry Williams and used to work with him. And so I got his phone number and I called him and I said, Jerry, I really miss you and I really love you and I just am a great admirer. Um, would you consider coming on my show? And he did.
Hmm,
And he was at that point, he was at the end of his life. He was pretty ill.
yeah.
He had like a personal aide and he was in a wheelchair. He came to the station. We all had lunch and then he came up and it was just the most incredible broadcast. I mean, he's such an amazing man. I mean, such humor. I mean, he was just, I mean, he could sit there and talk for 4 hours without any guests and just be spellbinding and brilliant. And he wasn't some, ivory tower intellect either. I mean, he was a street guy. Um, Anyways, so I ended up getting him a show at that station.
Oh,
And he did the show for about 2 months from his home. And then he passed away.
Jeez.
And I consider him to be a mentor.
Now, at
But
its height, what was he syndicated or some?
no, he was just Boston. I mean, this is
Yeah.
before. And also, I mentioned to Jerry that listening to him is what made me conservative. And I remember he was very annoyed. But just that's what kind of did it. I mean, it kind of plus working out. Filing my first tax returns as a self-employed businessman did it. I was like, holy crap! I remember showing up at H&R Block. I was all excited to pay taxes. I've had a good year. It's first year in business. I'm happy to pay taxes. I felt patriotic about it. But then all of a sudden, the tax, assistant said, "No, no, no, Mr. Morse, we're not done yet. We
Yeah.
have to still figure out state taxes. We have to figure out Social Security. We have to figure out penalties. You didn't make quarterlies. We have to this, that." By the time it was done, the tax bill was double,
Oh
and
boy.
I was in shock. I was almost catatonic. I was so upset.
Oh.
All the money that I had saved, it wasn't a lot, but that I was going to use it to expand the business, to maybe bring in some staff. All of it had to go taxes. And that's what led me start thinking about what exactly is the government doing with all this money? I mean, from an economic standpoint, it would have made more sense to let me invest it into this business to create more products and more jobs and more financial, more, exchange of, currency or whatever, and now it's all going to the government. So I want to know what it is they're doing with it. And that's when I started to investigate. And that's when I started to realize that big government was not the way to go. And then the final thing that
Hmm.
brought me to become more conservative, and this was something that happened very slowly, even though it was always there, was that I came to really very much believe in God. That really was like a major shift for me. And in fact, I should mention my new book is called God is God. It's coming out October 1st. So I'm looking
Oh.
forward to having a new book out and doing some interviews. And I talk about this. I talk about why God is God, why God is real, and why it's completely consistent with science. And I get into different issues around that. It's a short book, but I think it's going to be a good one.
No, that's a very good conversion story in both
Yeah,
senses, actually.
yeah, exactly. So I think that it was a gradual thing for me. It was sort of being in the school of hard knocks of working and belief and just listening to people like Jerry Williams and just other people that are out there making normal common sense off the street made me question some of these, smart Alex who are writing editorials in the Globe and the usual received wisdom.
Was there ever a local conservative guy as a counterpart to Jerry Williams?
No, I mean Jerry was. I mean he was. I think Jerry considered himself to be liberal, but the reality is he really wasn't. I mean, not if you listen to the way he viewed the world. Um, and I remember, he really took on Michael Dukakis
Oh,
in 1988 in some of the most hysterical stuff. I mean, he was brilliant. Just an amazing talk show host. There's never been anyone like him. And then, of course, I mean, there were other hosts I started listening to as well that actually were conservative, like the late David Brudnoy,
yeah.
who was a very intellectual and really presented conservative thought in a way that was quite powerful. And I always liked talk radio anyway, but just writing this book has made me realize that we're all qualified to talk about God. There's no because we all have the same ability and capacity to know God. I mean, that's not the preserve of a theologian or an intellectual. And I get into how that matters and why that can make a difference.
Huh, sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you should have a virtual book signing.
How would I do that?
Um, well, okay, you don't have a call-in forum, but I imagine when you stream on YouTube, there's a possibility of live comments.
There is.
And It would be more difficult. Maybe people can email you, but the point is that in the distribution of these books, Joe Blow calls you and said, "Gee, Charles, I'd like to buy this book, and just sign it and so on." And he sends his money, or however he goes on the website to buy it, or however you're going to do it. And people like if a book is personalized.
Good thought. Good suggestion. I mean, I'm thinking about the marketing of the book. I already have some pretty good interviews that I know I'll be doing, and I'm gonna, so I'm looking forward to all aspects of it. But so I'll definitely keep you posted on that. Anyways,
Okay,
Mike,
well, we've covered a
we've
number
kind
of
of covered the whole lot today, haven't we?
the full gamut here.
Okay. So I'll talk to you next week at Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time.
That sounds great.
Mike, do you want to mention any articles you've written or any websites you
Well,
want people to go
actually,
to?
what I did was kind of said the current article on Health News Digest is more. It was away from the technical aspects of COVID. It's more the spiritual side. How to combat anxiety, so to speak, during this pandemic, and we end up citing a bunch of sources, and I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it had good information in it. I didn't think it was that great. I got a ton of email. Either people were sick of just seeing the technical stuff all the time, but and admittedly, some of these references were obscure that I was able to find. One of them was I got a lot of positive on. In fact, I think it's his saint's day today, Padre Pio,
Mm-hmm.
who said, "Don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will listen to your prayers." And
Wonderful.
that was, there were. Well, it was funny. I used that as the concise way of these people who are more intellectual coming up with, this various detailed advice. And it struck a nerve. I didn't realize that so many people knew about Padre Pio, but yeah, so that was different for me. But mostly I was just sick of writing about the technical aspects of this thing.
No, that's important stuff. Where can I see the article?
It's on Health News Digest.
Okay.
I also mirror it on gasdetection.com. But I've got the mirror. The mirror goes back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I go back far enough that there's some stuff I'm not exactly pleased with back 20 plus years ago. But there you go.
You have a huge catalog.
Yeah, it's too
Probably
much.
thousands of articles.
It's close to 2,000, I think.
That's incredible.
But, you know.
All right, Mike. Listen, I'll talk to you next week. Michael D. Shaw. Thanks a lot.
All right. Good to see you as always.
Thanks a lot. All right, I'll talk to you soon.